Brian, I'm so excited for this. So first off, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks, Harry.
Not at all, but listen, you've probably answered the question on, how did you found Coinbase many, many times. And this show is going to be very different in many ways. So I want to dive by kind of going straight into it. We're all a function of our histories and, a product of our histories. If I ask you the question, what are you running from and what are you running towards, Brian, if we really just start at the deep end?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm glad you're starting off right with the therapy session here. Actually, all joking aside, I think there is a lot of psychology and therapy involved in starting a company. So it's a really good question. I mean, look, I think a lot of people start off in their career running from something, and I'll tell you what it was in my case. I think, I was always a shy and introverted kid, and I had this fear of, it was a couple things. I felt like, people didn't listen to me. They didn't maybe I felt like I have such good ideas, but I'm not confident, I'm not articulate, and I couldn't get people to hear my ideas. And then I think I had this deep fear about never doing something important in my life. And I don't even really know exactly where that came from, but I was like, I'm gonna gosh darn do. Can I swear on this program? I don't know. I was like, yeah. I'm gonna fucking go do something great here or die trying, And I had this real desire to, maybe it was a status thing or a sense of importance. I didn't feel important or worthwhile on my on my own, which is a deep kind of psychological thing. And then I would say that as people kind of oftentimes in an entrepreneur's life, you grow, you see a little bit of success, and then what happens is the thing that was motivating you, which was probably fear or anger or whatever, shame, initially kind of starts to go away a little bit. Maybe it's not 100%, and so you start to lose your motivation. And I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs kind of go through this existential moment of crisis after they start to lose the initial thing that was driving them, like fear or anger, and then they have to move towards something that brings them actual joy or love or just that they're actually passionate about. And so I kind of had my own moment of that somewhere along the last 10 years where I started to think, all right, what do I actually like doing now that Coinbase has been, $1 billion valuation or whatever goal I had in my mind. And I was like, okay, well, I love building things with technology. That's probably my favorite thing to do. Even if I was alone in a cabin in the woods for a decade, and I had no human contact, I'd probably just be building things. I don't know what I'd be doing with wood and an axe or, building a garden or a road or a tree house, or I'd be doing something and trying to make fire or whatever. And then the other thing I love doing is learning new things. So I'm always curious. I'm trying to absorb new knowledge, and being a company CEO is always pushing you outside your comfort zone into new areas. And then I guess the last thing I love is, it makes me feel good to try to do things at scale that have an impact on the big meta problems of the world. And so, if I see we went from 1 million people are using this to 10 million or something, it just gives me a high. I don't know why. It gets me excited about, oh my gosh, we can have even more impact. And some people, they don't have that. They're very content having an impact with, a classroom of 30 kids, or maybe just helping one person that they're mentoring or whatever. And they find that incredibly fulfilling. And I think that's great. For me, I don't get the same feeling unless I'm trying to do something at scale that has a major impact on the world. So that's a little bit about my journey.
Can I ask, I'm with you. The trouble is you never get off the treadmill. And
yeah.
What I mean by that is you get to 10 million users. I don't know, Coinbase obviously has many, many, many more. I mean, I obviously read, Super was 20 million people, hitting Coinbase website. The scale is enormous. But then I know you, Brian, I'm probably the same. Well, what about next quarter? What about the next month? And you never actually sit with the happiness. Do you ever get off the treadmill? And do you worry about that?
Yeah, so I have definitely thought about that because I'm not somebody who's really good at celebrating. Usually by the time I accomplish some goal that I've set, maybe I've worked on it for years, by the time I actually hit it, I'm usually not even thinking about it. I'm because by the time you're at 60%, 70%, you're like, oh my gosh, I can see where this is going. It's gonna get there in the next 6 months or a year, or just even if I did nothing, because a lot of the hard work is up front. And so it's not like I have some kind of moment of oh my gosh, it feels so good and I hit the goal. Honestly, I don't really feel that, but I do feel a deep sense of fulfillment, I would say, just about if I look at where I was 10 years ago or where I'm now or a year ago, and I was like, okay, I feel like I'm making progress. I'm doing something good in the world. And then, by the way, obviously I take time to kind of do other things in life besides work, right? Like I work with my partner and family and friends and like just have fun. But I think if I wasn't working on something hard and really difficult, I wouldn't feel as fulfilled. I've tried going on vacation, and for, after like 2 or 3 or 4 days, I'm just like, this is, I need to go read something. I need to learn something. I need to build something. So it's almost like an addiction. I've had this thought before. I have no like evidence to back this up, but, I almost feel like some successful people, people have all kinds of addictions, right? Social media and drugs and like various things. I happen to be addicted. Yeah, soda. I happen to be addicted to building things and scaling them. And sometimes, I'll overdo it and I'm like, oh my God, like I haven't taken a day off in like however long or whatever. And I'm like, I really need to balance it. I'm almost overdoing it. So it's like a form of like addiction that I think is sort of positive for the world, hopefully. But yeah, everything, look, I constantly go back and forth between, look, you should have more balance in your life and, you don't have to, what's the point of all this crazy stuff? Maybe you should have kids and, I'm working on that too. But then the other part of me is like, you know what, whatever, never stop. If I find it fulfilling, I'd rather just keep building things and do that for the next, 50 years or more, hopefully, if we get longevity stuff working. So, I hope that if you can make work like your career fun, you'll never work a day in your life. So it's oftentimes when it does work, it's getting to a place where, I'm traveling to something ostensibly for work, but I'm having fun at the same time. I'm meeting with friends, people I haven't seen in a long time. I'll go on a hike. I'll go to dinner with interesting people. I think like Jeff Bezos had this term one time where he talked about, it's not work-life balance, it's work-life harmony. And I personally feel that. Like if I go somewhere for a week with nothing to do but sit on the beach, I find it to be, and go to museums and stuff, I find it to be like not that fun. But if I go to something like, I'm going to be in Tokyo, later this year or whatever for work, we have an office there and, I can meet interesting people there and see friends that I haven't seen and have great food. But I'm doing work mostly during the day. So that's my current approach.
There's so many things I want to unpack there, which is why I'm so glad we ignore schedules. But like you mentioned, celebrating milestones that you hit. A hard thing that I have now with, 1/100th of the team that you have is like when you hit milestones, I want the team to be happy and I want them to celebrate them. But it's just a milestone that's been hit. Back to work, like 10 minutes later, guys. This is not something to... How do you create good culture when we hit milestones, but also not create apathy that like, yay, milestone hit, and we can have a break now?
Well, okay. So, just as a general answer, I would say, nobody's good at everything. So that's part of being a CEO is complementing yourself with people around you that are good at the stuff you're not good at. So some CEOs are really good at celebrating. I'm not. So I have people around me who are better at it and on the exec team and like Emily, our president and COO and various people on the people org and whatnot. So, and we also kind of defer a lot of it to managers and leaders of various products and organizations, right? Like they all have budgets to kind of go do stuff. And, I might be like the awkward person who like shows up for half an hour at like the massive social event, cause I'm a little more introverted, but like, I'll show up, make an appearance, but I'll let them do their thing. And like, if people want to, celebrate till 2 a.m. or whatever, it's probably better for the CEO to step out, before things get too wild at the party. But, that's sort of been my approach.
You mentioned the addiction element there, and I've definitely had that, in work and not work. There's also always lows with addiction and kind of rock bottom. When you look back on the Coinbase journey, we see the documentary now. We see it on Hulu, we see it on Amazon Prime. I think it's often humanizing for entrepreneurs to also hear like the not so easy times. Applying that to addiction, what were the rock bottom times in the journey with Coinbase that you viscerally remember?
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned the documentary. We can chat more about it later, but I do think the documentary does a good job of highlighting the ups and downs of what it's actually like to build a company and to run a company. And so part of the reason why I wanted to create that documentary was to sort of pull back the curtain and show people the good, bad, and the ugly, and show that it's not like we're not geniuses and we're not bad people. We're just regular people trying to build something good in the world. And you can have quirky characters and you have flaws and you make mistakes. Some of those that we talk about in the documentary a little bit, but some of the ones that come to mind there was, there was the Neutrino acquisition we did, which was a complete, it basically created this whole social media campaign to delete Coinbase. There was like a hashtag trending. And we talk about that stressful moment. That was actually a moment where I happened to be in Hawaii trying to have a vacation. And what was funny, the whole thing blew up and everybody started calling me like, Brian, you need to get home, you need to fly back here later today. Like this is an emergency. And anyway, that was like a kind of a comical thing. Whenever you go on vacation, sometimes things blow up.
Pause on that. How did you deal with that as a leader? That is really stressful when you see delete Coinbase. It's, I just had Emil Michael on from Uber, and obviously there was delete Uber. This is not an easy time. How did you deal with that as a leader?
Yeah. Okay. Well, one thing I've tried to figure out over time is that there's real emergencies and then there's a lot of fake emergencies. And so a lot of times people will be calling you, or they want to meet with you and a CEO, and they're really spun up on something. And they're like, this is an emergency, right? And you have to kind of get good at determining what's a real emergency, what's a fake emergency. I'm probably a little bit too calm in these moments, almost to a fault. Like there's certainly times where this is actually probably one of my weaknesses. Like conventional CEO advice is like, if there's ever something that's going viral and it's like scaring everyone and you need to be out there immediately in front of, the public and go on CNBC or like whatever, the news show is and restore confidence. Right. And what's weird is that in these moments, there's that old saying about like a lie can get halfway around the truth or halfway around the world before the truth has the chance to put their shoes on. Sometimes I see these things like, you're just going about your regular day. You're trying to build things. You're trying to meet with people. You're trying to hire people. And then like some misinformation or whatever will just like go viral around the whole world. Like while you're in a bunch of meetings or something, you pop out of these meetings and you feel like, oh my gosh, like the whole world is gone crazy. Okay. So what are we going to do? And, my default almost to a fault is like, I don't really feel any pressure to get out there with some kind of quick statement before we've actually figured out what are the facts, what do we want to do about it. And I think, the way to synthesize these two ideas is you can put out a holding statement, right? So this is like part of the value of like a great head of comms inside a company is they can craft this piece and help you get to ground truth, but they can put out a statement, the holding statement, and say, we're aware of the issue, we're looking into it, we'll have an update for you by X, like, 12 hours from now or tomorrow or whatever. So everybody can just kind of calm down. They can take a breath. They're like, okay, they're aware of the problem. We're going to hear what they're thinking, and then it gives you some time to go figure out ground truth. And it's surprisingly hard to figure out ground truth sometimes because you pull a bunch of people into this meeting. You're like, why did we do this? Why did we write it that way? And, whenever the CEO pulls a bunch of people into a meeting, you can imagine people are a little nervous, right? And they're like, oh my God, this thing is trending on Twitter. Brian's going to come in and fire somebody. And frankly, I've never done that once in my whole life. I've never fired somebody in anger in the moment, right? Like we evaluate people's performance over multiple quarters and things like that. But for some, it's human nature. So you'll oftentimes get somebody in a room and you try to calm them down and you're like, this is not a blame thing. No one's upset here. We're just trying to figure out what happened so we can kind of respond. And when people are triggered, they'll give you these, no, like we looked, we definitely did this. We checked that, we checked Y, we checked Z, and here's why we did it. And, oftentimes I'll find out later, like the story was a little more nuanced. And so I always am kind of trying to listen for, all right, but forget all that. Like, what's the piece that we could have done better? Because sometimes that's what like the world wants to hear externally. They don't want to hear all your excuses. Like, we thought of that, or we did this. And, they just want to hear like, okay, here's the part that we could have done better. And here's the part, by the way, that's misinformation. And just if it is true, the world seems to like believe it and they'll go back to focusing on something else. And if you try to like, put some corporate PR speak in there about how you didn't actually mess up, then it'll just make the mob even angrier. So, anyway,
I'm so enjoying. I've got to ask. You said there about real emergency, fake emergency. I spoke to Emily before the show, and she gave me some crackers, and so I'm going to blame her for all of them. Okay. So I'm going to see which one's a real emergency, which one's a fake emergency. NFT platform launch that obviously didn't work. This was her. I blame her entirely. Like, was that a real emergency or a fake emergency? And why, in your mind, did it not work?
Well, so that wasn't an emergency in the sense of it just wasn't something urgent. Sometimes you put out a product and you could have launched it better, but that's just like, okay, well, we have, the next 3 months to kind of continue improving it, or the next 3 years or whatever. With the NFT launch, I think the thing that we should have done better was we made a classic mistake, which is never kind of overhype a product before you put it out there. Because the version 1 of every product sucks. I've never seen a single product in tech I've ever launched or seen anybody else launch in their career where the V1 didn't kind of suck. And so you never want to like ship vaporware or hype up vaporware. So we made a mistake, which was we started talking about the product and putting out screenshots ahead of time. So people's expectations were high, and like all V1 products, it wasn't like fully what they were expecting. So they were a little disappointed, but I think that's fine. It doesn't deter us. We actually have a good strategy there, but we're basically integrating it natively into our app just to make it easier. We're aggregating listings from all the different NFT marketplaces out there. So basically you should be able to, people are already buying their crypto on Coinbase. If it's, instead of like having to move it to a self-custodial Chrome extension and then using another marketplace, if you can just basically, you've bought it, your stuff's already in Coinbase, you might as well just view the listings aggregated of all the exchange, different marketplaces out there, click the buy button, and it's done. So we're trying to just make crypto easier to use, and NFT marketplaces are no exception. And I think that's going to be a multi-year journey for us, and I think NFTs will come back in the next cycle. So that one's fine. That's not a real emergency.
When you broke the internet, which I totally agreed with, you know what I'm talking about here, with the politicization of leadership and that statement, real emergency, fake emergency?
Well, that was a real emergency, but it was self-induced. We knew it was going to cause all hell to break loose when we put out that statement.
Did you?
Yeah, for sure. It's like it's a third rail hot button issue. We spent, probably about a month ahead of that time, just like drafting it, talking with the board, talking with different leaders internally. People were very nervous. And some people even really begged me not to post it, but I was like, I think it's the right thing. We have to do it because we weren't aligned internally about being apolitical. And we had a small vocal percentage of the company just kind of who thought we should be engaging in all these social issues. So it was a major distraction internally. That was kind of like a slow rolling emergency. It wasn't like, there was a single moment where the employee walkout happened, but after that, everybody came back to work. And then it was just kind of like in the background noise, something was like, slowing down our progress, and we weren't aligned. So I knew I had to fix it eventually. And that's where we worked up the courage, put out the blog post. But yeah, this is just like, big decisions to make in the company. That's not like a true emergency. The emergencies are typically like, the whole site is down, and not just for like a few minutes, but some kind of crazy, tech debt migration, whatever thing happened, and you need to go investigate with the team. And it's like, if you're down multiple days or something like that, that's a 5-alarm fire. Like you need to go, however many, I don't know how many alarms there's the maximum, probably 5, 10, whatever, but that's a true emergency, right? Or if, I don't know, some crazy misinformation is floating around, earlier this in 20, I think it was earlier this year, there was like a bunch of bankruptcy fears that were running around or whatever. And I probably shouldn't even say the B word. Everybody freaks out when CEOs say the B word. But there was a bunch of, that thing went all around the world. That was like a true emergency, and it just so much misinformation out there. But I don't know. Those are true emergencies.
Do you have a decision-making framework? So like for me, I have like, okay, is it a reversible decision or an irreversible decision? And then like for the fund, will it be more than a 2% exposure or not on the cash basis? And if it's like irreversible and more than 2% of my fund, it's an immediate decision. That's my framework. Do you have frameworks for making these decisions?
Yeah. So I'll tell you early on at Coinbase and then what we sort of have now. So, early on when we were a startup, actually there's a great scene about this in the documentary where Olaf, one of the early employees, I would sort of be plugged in with my headphones, like trying to code the app like for 5 hours a day. So people were sort of instructed, don't bother Brian while he's, jacked in or whatever. But if there was some major bug on the site, Olaf had this system he developed where he was like, is the potential loss, 4 figures, 5 figures, 6 figures, 7 figures? And so he would sort of run up to my desk if it was like this, and he was instructed sort of, don't come up to me unless it's more than like $100,000 or something that we might lose. And so he'd come up with a Post-it note and be like, potential loss, $2 million. And I'd be like, okay, I'm taking off my headphones. Let's go, let's go deal with it. So we just did simple things like that early on. But as you get to be a bigger company, for one thing, we have like a whole risk framework. We have like a risk appetite statement. We have, various signature authority policies about who in the company can decide to spend how much and why and when, and where we're willing to take higher risk, where we're willing to take lower risk. We also use a decision-making framework called RAPID, RAPID, which Bain developed. And I found it to be pretty helpful as an organization gets to be more than, 500 people, where you just can't really keep track of who everyone is and what they're doing. And you don't want the CEO or the exec team to become a bottleneck. So you do have to push decision-making down in the org and get clear about what decisions they can make and what they can't. And rapids are good ways to do that because they basically help you identify like who's going to be the decider and then who's giving input, which sounds like a simple thing, but often in big companies, you'll get these like kind of vetocracies of there's like 7 people, 10 people involved in this thing, and each one of them thinks they can veto or whatever if they don't agree. And then you basically end up having a committee, de facto committee, which slows things down. So you need to get really clear about defining, okay, there's going to be one directly responsible individual to make this decision. Who is it? And you try to often push that down in the org. And then you can have input from all the relevant parties. They write their input in the document, so you make sure everybody feels heard. It provides a good paper trail where like 3 months later when someone's like, what did we decide again? You can go back to the document, or 3 years later, you're like, why did we decide to do that stupid thing? You can go back and read the document and what did everybody think? How did we reach that decision? So that's been a great tool to formalize our decision making.
You mentioned that kind of the size of the company also, you said post 500, obviously Coinbase much larger, but you're also a public company now. And I spoke to a lot of your investors before the show, and they mentioned this. And I wanted to ask, do you enjoy being a public company CEO? Don't worry, it's just us. And is there any elements that are like super surprising about it?
Yeah. Okay, so this was a big question for me before Coinbase went public, and I wanted to go figure out, do I even want to be a public company CEO? Yeah. Because I had sort of heard rumors about this, but it was never the highest priority for me as I was trying to build. First, you have to make a company that even has the potential to go public. So what I did was I went and I talked to a bunch of CEOs before going public about, some of them were people who had gone public, and they were public company CEOs, founder CEOs. Others were people who decided to hand off the company and have a professional CEO come in or something like that. Or just to stay private indefinitely. And so I kind of got a good, different set of options. And I personally decided I wanted to become a public CEO. Sorry, you want to say something?
Just dive in. What did you learn from speaking to them? I know you would have gathered all the data and inputs that you could have done. What did you learn from speaking to them, getting those opinions?
Okay, so I learned about, look, there's a lot of pros and there's a lot of cons. The pros are that, it's a great marketing event for the company. You're suddenly viewed as legitimate by the world. Makes it easier to get deals done with other Fortune 500 companies because like the Fortune 500 just wants to do business with other Fortune 500. It's kind of seen as they're more established. The financials are audited, they've met a public company standard. It's a real company. And so that's turned out to be very true. We've been able to close deals with, BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, and, Meta, formerly Facebook. Like we're now, especially with our Coinbase Cloud business and things like that, we're now able to power things with Fortune 500, which wasn't really happening before. The other thing is it's a lot easier to raise money as a public company. So, as a private company, you often spend a lot of time as a CEO on fundraising, and it's a ton of work, and as a public company, you can issue equity. You can also raise debt. I was kind of surprised to learn that, like in 2021, our CFO came to me and was like, the markets are really good, the debt terms are really good. We should probably stock up for the next, if there's another cycle, which turned out to be very fortuitous. And so she basically went out. We raised $3 billion in 1 week. I didn't do a single meeting. And we got very, very favorable terms on this debt. And the whole reason is that we're a public company. So there's a very liquid market for debt for public companies. I can tell you as a private company CEO, if you had ever told me you can do the next fundraise without going to a single meeting, I would have said you're crazy, right? And so that turned out to be a big benefit. Now, there's definitely a lot of cons, some cons, I should say. Okay, so one thing is that I've talked to some founder CEOs who run public companies, and they have to deal with a lot of activist shareholders and investors, right? And look, this is a big topic. I think activist shareholders probably can create value in some situations, but if you're in a place where you're trying to get the company working, you want to take big ambitious bets, and activist shareholders are calling you at the time or trying to do hostile takeovers of the company, or they're trying to kind of force you to go for sort of profits and dividends where you want to invest in the next wave of the growth or whatever. These can be things that are huge time sucks for the company, both for the board and for management. And so I've talked to some founder CEOs that just said, like, the job's not fun anymore because I'm basically just dealing with activists all the time. And so, anyway, there's various ways to solve that. You can get like dual class stock, and that's sort of like a norm that people do.
I was just chatting to a very close friend of mine who runs a very large public company today, and obviously their stock price is 60% down. And he said the hardest thing for me today is I have to come into the office, and everyone is just looking at their net worth, going, "Fuck, I'm 60% down," and the company's just the same, and just the morale sucks. And he's just like, it's just really freaking hard having the same level of morale when everyone's just become half as wealthy.
Yeah. So that was the next one I was going to say. You took the words out of my mouth. So of course, the other downside is people are looking at the stock price every day, and you basically get mark to market every day. Whereas in the private markets, you can kind of be living in a fantasy land, at least until you need to raise money again, about like, no, we're still worth X, So one thing that I did, which I think turned out really well, was I think it was like the week after we went public, everyone's celebrating, great. And I sent out a note to the whole company, and I basically said, okay, and by the way, this is when the stock was kind of doing super well, super high. So it's not when things were down. It was like when things were really good. And I kind of said to everybody, look, new cultural norm. We don't talk about short-term fluctuations in the stock price at Coinbase. It's a faux pas to do so. And just to casually mention it, in water cooler conversation, and just, we're all human, like we can't avoid seeing it sometimes, but like we don't talk about it because we don't want to have short-term thinking at this company. We want to make sure we're building for the next decade or 2 or 3 or 4. And for the most part, that turned out to be a really good thing that I think took hold within the organization. Maybe people are doing it and they're just not showing me, but I actually don't really see people talking about short-term stock price fluctuations. Now, of course, even in this market where things went down dramatically, it's hard not to like think about it a little bit, right? And so when you're having conversations about stock-based compensation or things like that, of course you have to look at these kind of metrics, but that's in the context of a very specific group of people within the company. The last thing I'll say is that I think being a crypto company actually helped us prepare a little bit for being a public company, because the whole time we were private, people were looking at the price of Bitcoin and Ethereum and things like that every day. And so they were used to seeing like the value of at least part of their net worth go up and down all the time.
Can I ask, why is this crypto winter different to ones that have come before? I mean, the thing with, crashes is, you always go, it's never been this bad. And the truth is everything, this too shall pass. And we just live in a continuously cyclical game. So what's different and what's the same?
Yeah, I would say, so mostly it's the same. So I can tell you what we do in every cycle, right? When things are up, we basically everyone's focused on scaling. We're going through hyper growth. We're trying to capitalize on big opportunities, just throwing money at any problem, because like the biggest issue we have is just how to keep everything up and running. In down markets, obviously we have to focus on, managing costs rigorously, driving revenue where we can. We sometimes go clean up a lot of the stuff that we just threw money at in the crazy upcycle, and we're like, oh, that thing is over provisioned, or there's tech debt or whatever. We also make sure we invest in the future. Like we need to be able to plant the seeds and do innovation in a down market. You have more time to build and innovate the things that could be really big in the next upcycle. So there's a little bit of, that's how we kind of think about up and down cycles. But sorry, I'm missing the core of your question, which was what?
Which is like, what's different about this crypto winter compared to other crypto winters?
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, look, the main thing is that the macro environment is down too. So it's not really a crypto winter. It's an everything winter. It's a macro winter. So I don't know. I think one of the main differences is that people are not coming up to me and saying like, is crypto not going to work, or is crypto over? Like everybody still seems to be pretty excited about all the use cases for crypto. Institutions are still signing up at a massive rate. That's the main difference. In most prior crypto cycles, people got disillusioned about, is crypto still going to be a thing? This one is not that. It's basically just, okay, everything's down in tech growth, so let's just bide our time, build great stuff, and be ready for the next upswing.
Can I ask you a bit of a weird and a bit of a personal one? You spoke earlier about kind of, feeling worthy in a lot of ways and then kind of aligning that to stock prices and, bluntly, financial gain. One that I think about a lot is actually relationship to money. How do you think about your relationship to money today? And also, you watch the documentary back and you see Brian Armstrong, 10 years ago starting in a very different financial position. How's your relationship to money changed over time?
Look, as a young kid, I was kind of always interested in making money. It's interesting, everything from the lemonade stand to, I would read the business section a lot. This was even in maybe 6th or 7th grade. I'd read the business section of the newspaper every day, which I think is probably somewhat atypical. And I remember even just reading classified ads for things like houses and boats and stuff and be like, okay, if I save up my allowance, how much would it take me to be able to afford this boat or something like that, right? So, and it wasn't so much I don't own a boat today. I don't have any desire to own a boat, but it was more just I was kind of fascinated with money somehow. It was like a way to acquire resources and be able to do more things. And I was like, well, I want to build this building and I want to invest in this thing. And I want to if I can hire more people. And so it's just, capital is a way to, have the ability to sort of do more things in the world. I don't know if there's a simpler way to say it than that. I think a lot of things that people misunderstand about people who've made money is that they think that they want to do it for personal consumption. And look, there is some amount of that. You might want to have something that just saves you time or whatever, have a nice house or, a chef or something if it saves you time. But you also kind of it's nice to cook dinner with your family too. So it's, anyway, what am I saying? Basically, I think having money is a good thing, mostly because it's not that it's going to make you happier or anything like that beyond a certain point. It's that it allows you to do more things in the world. You can become a great capital allocator, right? And I think that's true no matter who you are. I've talked to some scientists or whoever, academics, and they're kind of very anti-making a lot of money. And I'm well, what are you passionate about in life? Scientific research? Are you passionate about that park that's in your neighborhood or whatever? If you generate capital, you can clean up the park. You can fund your next experiment, the next 10 experiments that you want to do without having to get, these grants written. So capital is a way to accomplish more of what you want to do in the world. It's not, I think most personal consumption, unless it's there to basically help your productivity or to just give you more time with loved ones, is kind of a waste. So I wouldn't spend any money on, Ferraris and crazy jewelry or something. I don't do any of that stuff.
Do you worry that with having, one thing that I worry about, but do you worry about with having children, you will not be able to perform at the highest level in execution? When you don't have children, you are with your partner, but you are the sole focus of your life. Suddenly, 6 a.m. wake up, and yes, you can pay for carers and nannies, but it's still fucking brutal, I've been told. Are you worried about maintaining execution perfection whilst also being a great parent?
I would say when I was younger, I definitely worried about this. And I in my 20s and maybe early 30s, I was thinking having kids would be too much of a productivity drag. And, but I've basically gotten over that completely. I've seen enough people now who have kids and they're highly productive. And they tell me that, it's crazy at home in the evening, bedtime and in the morning, but they generally view it as incredibly additive to their life. And I basically believe it at this point. I don't have kids yet, but I think that, I've seen other examples where taking care of someone or something actually doesn't harm your productivity. It makes your day more fulfilling and you can still be very productive.
Who do you learn from? Who are your mentors?
Well,
when you think about the people who advise you on parenting, who are the ones where you're tell me, how do you do it?
Well, okay. On the parenting thing, I just through various friends and contacts, coaches, our executives, our board, I've seen enough. That's where I'm kind of seeing those in just various conversations. I've had a number of mentors just kind of growing up with the company. And these can be board members, like Fred Wilson was an investor in our Series A, and he's still on our board to this very day. And he's been a great sounding board for me just when I'm trying to think through something difficult. And
what's been your biggest takeaway from having Fred as a mentor?
He just has an incredible ability to sort of distill things down to the simple question. And one thing I like about Fred is that he's not somebody who comes in there like, Brian, you need to do this, you need to do that. He's not pushy. He basically, he helps you get there on your own. And so sometimes I'll be telling him some problem I'm having, I don't know if I should hire this executive, this thing is good about them and this thing is that. And and he'll just ask me a question which sounds almost too simple to work, but it's incredibly effective. He's just like, well, Brian, do you want to work with this person? And he'll just leave it that hanging in the air. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That's not what it's more complicated than that. And he's like, is it? I mean, do you see yourself enjoying working with them or not? And then, he'll just hit you with these things and kind of boil it down to the simplest thing you could imagine. You're like, God damn it. I guess he's right. That's kind of what I have to decide. Right. Yeah. So I've had various executive coaches over the last 10 years, which have been really helpful. A couple of those make an appearance in the documentary too. And many different board members. I look to other CEOs sometimes for inspiration. I've developed friendships with people that kind of a friend group that I'm in with other CEOs that we sort of meet up every month. And
which other CEOs inspire you?
Sorry?
Which other CEOs inspire you?
Well, okay. So, I mean, look, I always hesitate to answer this question a little bit because I think if you say a name, someone's like, oh, this person wants to be like that person, right? It's not really about that. I think that there's a lot of CEOs that I learn from that are kind of I would say sort of in my peer group or a little ahead, a little behind, whatever. But I'm hearing different things from them that they're doing. And I'm like, that's a good idea. I should copy that. There's a bunch of people, Toby is on our board from Shopify. And I don't want to say the names, but in our friend group, there's a number of people there that I try to learn from. I would say, there's one entrepreneur that I do think I've been inspired by in the sense of and again, I don't want to over rotate on anything personally about their life or whatever, but just in terms of the scale of ambition and thinking bigger, I think Elon is kind of unmatched right now, I have to say. So he's somebody who, I think the lessons I learned from that was try more ambitious things. He's trying to do things that formerly only maybe governments people thought could do, right? About building a space program or solving climate change. And I love the scale of the ambition. I think he also was not afraid to sort of jump into sort of hard tech problems, not just bits, but atoms, if you will. I like the path that he followed where, he had a pretty good exit with PayPal in software. And then he decided to double down and keep building things and try even more ambitious things, which I really respect, as opposed to, some people just want to retire or whatever if they have a good exit. I think I love that he had the ambition to keep going.
Do you feel you're thinking ambitiously enough with Coinbase today?
So, look, 10 years ago, when I started the company, I remember thinking about this. I was like, what? Because I had tried a bunch of startup ideas and most of them didn't work. And I was like, what's the thing that I'm so passionate about? It's so crazy that in 10 years, I'll still be super fired up to be working on it. And so, obviously creating an entirely new economy for the whole world is a pretty ambitious thing. One that's more free and fair and global. And so, look, that's a 100-year mission. And we're going to keep doing that for a long time. And the mission of Coinbase is to increase economic freedom in the world. And that's something I'm really passionate about. I have a whole spiel on that about why economic freedom is so important. One thing we've thought about, I actually haven't shared this before, is that if somehow we feel like we're starting to make a real dent in economic freedom, would we expand the mission of the company at some point to just be about increasing freedom in the world? Period. All kinds of freedom, right? And you could imagine there's many types of freedom that are under threat today, right? There's, people, I feel like a lot of the tools and the apps that we use, they're being, basically run by bigger and bigger tech companies. They're being influenced by governments. There's censorship issues. There's data privacy issues. And we've seen the rise of things like, Signal and WhatsApp with encrypted messages that 10 years ago, that was considered if you were using encrypted messaging, you were a terrorist or something. Now it's the norm and it's the expectation. People don't want to have their stuff floating all over the world in plain text. And you could imagine all the layers of the stack, from the browser to where you store your data, like Google Drive and Dropbox. There should probably be like a decentralized private version of that using, Filecoin or whatever. You could imagine internet service providers. Like we're seeing more decentralization of that, I think, with things like Starlink and whatnot. Even computer like the operating systems, mobile and desktop, and increasingly VR, AR, and the hardware itself. These are all things which can be, they can have pressure points where bad actors can basically inject themselves in there. And so how can we kind of decentralize and increase freedom across all these dimensions, the freedom stack, if you will? So look, we're not changing the mission anytime soon, but that's one thing I've thought about over time is Coinbase is starting with financial services, arguably one of the most important, if not the most like foundation of freedom. Like if you can't like store your own wealth in a way that it can't be taken from you, then you probably don't have freedom in any other thing. But if you have that, then how do we add in other layers of freedom around, speech and other things?
A final one for the quickfire. What is the barrier to that transition from financial freedom to freedom? Is that just pure adoption from like consumer side adoption? Is it pure cash and resources to do multiple things at once? What is the barrier to that transition?
Yeah, I think it's capital. It's basically capital. Kind of like what we were saying earlier. If you acquire more capital, you can kind of do more ambitious things. And so I think that we need to stay focused for now on financial services and what we're doing with economic freedom. And then you could imagine like, as we scale the company, there'll be opportunities for various building new things, investing in things, buying other companies, and there could be a larger vision there over time.
I want to move into a quickfire, Brian. I could go off-piste all day, but I'm going to say a short statement, and you give me your immediate thoughts. Does that sound okay?
Great.
Okay, so what's the hardest element of your role with Coinbase today?
Right now, in this moment, it's basically, I don't know if it's the hardest thing, but the thing that it's just keeping everybody in the boat. It's like telling some of the war stories about, all right, we've been through 4 of these cycles, don't get disillusioned, don't get discouraged, don't pay attention to negative headlines too much. Keep our heads down, keep building great stuff, manage costs, keep innovating, and we're going to come out of this way stronger than we went in. Like Coinbase pulls ahead in down cycles. So I have to keep telling that story over and over again.
With the benefit of hindsight, what are the biggest missed opportunities that you didn't take, but you wish you had taken?
Let's see, there's a few. I mean, one is that I think from an international expansion point of view, we probably took too much of a US focus or US lens on international. And I think we've seen in the market that companies that basically served a bunch of countries out of one favorable region, and launched things like derivatives and things like that, that just products that weren't really allowed in the United States. They saw really good growth in the last cycle from that. So that was one thing we were probably late to the game on. I think we've got a good chance to fix that, though. Let's see what else. I mean, we overhired, I would say, in 2021. That was a mistake.
Do you blame yourself for that? I mean, the numbers were so stratospheric. You kind of had to serve the demand.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't really like blame as like a thing. I think there's just a learning opportunity in everything. You have to have accountability, of course, but it doesn't really accomplish anything to like dwell on it or like self-flagellate or whatever. So I think, look, if you put our mindset back in that time frame, we were on track. We did $7 billion in revenue, $3 billion in profit. We literally had a line out the door. The biggest problem the company had was we couldn't onboard customers fast enough, and customers were super upset that it was taking them so long to onboard. This was on more like the institutional business, and then our retail customers were just like, we want all these things that you don't have, and just take our money if you have them, but if you don't, like, we're going to go somewhere else. So it made total sense. I mean, we knew if you more than double headcount in a year, you're really flirting with danger in terms of like communication might break down, culture could break down. This is a common thing. We knew, and we sort of consciously took that bet, and we said, well, we don't know when this is going to end, but it would be irresponsible to like limit growth in this moment and not hire. Now, I think in the process, we moved to being a remote first company with COVID. It unleashed a hiring bottleneck that we had when we went to being remote, because of course the top of the funnel grows like 100x of the number of people who can work at the company, and our hiring engine started to fire on all cylinders. So it did get like too far ahead of us, I think, and that was something in the next upcycle. I think we won't make that a mistake again.
What broke first?
In terms of growing headcount that fast?
Yeah, is it the communication? Is it the accountability, the culture, the like resource allocation, like just too much? Like, what breaks first when you have such heavy growth?
Yeah. Let's see. I think decision making often breaks where it's not clear who's deciding what. That's a big one. You get pockets of weird behavior in the company as well, where you'll jump in and you're like, wait, they're doing what? Why are people doing that inside this company? It's not aligned with our culture or whatever. And it's just because we have people they've been here 2 months who are hiring someone new, right? And like they haven't fully absorbed the culture themselves. I do think the way that process is managed and how things are communicated, that will often break down too. So all those things.
Brian, what do you make of FTX? Many of your investors asked me to ask this. What do you make of them?
Let's see, lots of things. I mean, I think Sam is a brilliant guy. I've gotten a chance to talk to him a number of occasions. I think he's done a really good job of kind of generating interest in the company with his public persona, which is something that, as more of an introvert, I don't love doing that as much. I think it's, look, the press can be fickle too, right? They can build you up and tear you down. And so I think it's a little dangerous, but I think he's done incredibly effective at getting more interest on the company there. They've moved very quick. I give them a lot of points for execution, speed of execution. I think, especially with a small team. I mean, frankly, this is a little bit what Coinbase was like in the early days, maybe 2014, 15, when we had, 300, 500 people. It was easy to just know what everyone was doing. We all were in one location. We were executing super quick, right? And so part of this transition, I could have basically decided to keep the company that size and focus on our core product of retail trading. But I really decided, I want Coinbase to be a multi-product company. I want us to grow into these different customer segments. We have like this massive business for institutions now, and we have Coinbase Cloud, and we have commerce and wallet and NFT and all these things. So I basically made a conscious decision that said, I don't just want to have our one core retail app. I want us to be a multi-product company, a generational company. And so I made the difficult choice. We're going to grow this thing. We're going to have different leaders of different products. There's going to be more complicated org structures. We're going to have multiple geographic locations all over the world. And so it's definitely more complex. And part of that, you do slow down. I put out a blog post about, operating efficiently at scale, which is all the things that we're doing to try to get to that next level. So, anyway, that's a little bit of the contrast, but I think generally, both FTX and Binance have been really good at execution, and they've taken a different risk posture, I would say, internationally as well, which we'll have to see what happens with that. But Coinbase is basically sort of taking we're more trusted, compliant, secure, whatever. We're trying to be an easier to use product in many cases as well. We're not really necessarily trying to build for like somebody who just wants to do pro trading, although we have really good pro trading features. We also make it easy to do all the other stuff you want to do in crypto, right? Around Web3 and NFTs and dApps and things like that. So that's a little bit of the contrast, but I generally have nothing but respect for those folks. And I think that the more the merrier. This is about growing the pie 100x rather than any kind of competitive thing short term.
You mentioned kind of regulation there. Micky Malka asked, what are your biggest mistakes or regrets in communicating with regulators?
I can't think of too many. I do think Coinbase in the early days, we decided to reach out to regulators and just proactively be a friend to them and, try to be helpful and then follow their instruction, things like that, which was a unique thing at the time. I feel really good about that decision. I think it's created, it's definitely caused us to be able to operate slower at times, I would say, which has been unfortunate for customers in certain cases. There's no doubt that going that path takes longer and it's more work. But I think and I hope that it'll be a competitive differentiator long term. Believe me, there's some moments where we're frustrated about that. We're like, okay, we're the regulated public company here, following all the rules, but why are we getting the scrutiny for this when there's crazy stuff happening out there in the world? But I don't think anything we're getting is that unfair. I don't know. There was a little tweet storm I got into with Gary Gensler, and look, I'm not happy with how he's doing things in the US right now. I think that he had a major opportunity to come in and actually clearly regulate the industry and publish clear rules and say, this is a security, this is not. Work with the CFTC and other areas of government to kind of create a clear framework which protected consumers, go after the fraud and all that stuff, but then allow this industry to grow in a regulated environment in the US. I don't think he's really done that. So I've been pretty frustrated, and I haven't found him to be cooperative in some of these conversations. Whereas, I think we're trying to do the right thing, and we're happy to engage, but it's been very hostile for some reason. But all that being said, do my tweet storms help the situation? I don't know. I think that it's important. This is where we often struggle as a company where, 95% of the time, I think being the most trusted brand in the space is about working with the government. And I'm happy to show up in DC anywhere, and I work with people, and we 95% of the time we're aligned. There's reasonable people in government, and we can kind of work all these things out. 5% of the time, I think we actually have to make a stand and protect our customers from bad government, which is a contrarian thing about how to be the most trusted brand. It's not about always working with government. 95% of the time, yes. 5% of the time, it's about protecting our customers from bad government. And you've seen us do that in a couple cases, like with the Tornado Cash situation, where we're helping fund some lawsuits that we think there was overreach, although we're happy to work with Treasury and OFAC, and we do that all the time. Same thing with the SEC. We've found the SEC staff to be incredibly easy to work with, but sometimes engaging with the chair has been a counterproductive exercise.
What is bad government? That's when it's like their actions don't produce good results for consumers?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, in a democracy, right, the government reports to the people. Like, the people are the electorate, the board who elects these people. And, and by the way, the elected officials sometimes appoint these heads of regulators, because the regulators are not elected themselves. But yeah, sometimes we see bad policy come out of the government that, I don't think that's the majority case, right? Like I said, I'd say 95% of the time, this is not a US thing, by the way, all over the world, we generally get to reasonable answers with regulators and policymakers, and I think those are really strong relationships we have. But 5-10% of the time, we see something come out that it's actually harming crypto. It's not in a way that doesn't protect consumers. It's treating crypto on an unlevel playing field with traditional financial services. We see sometimes overreach. There's people who somehow get the idea in their head that crypto is only being used by bad people, and they don't realize a lot of the facts. And so, we see bad policy proposed, and in that case, I think we have an obligation to push back.
My friend, I'm in the UK. We've had 3 leaders in about 3 months, so don't worry. I know about bad government. Final one for you: Coinbase in 10 years. What does that look like? Well,
anybody can guess. I mean, it's the future is a little hard to predict. But look, here's one vision I've had for it, which is that I think Coinbase Global, the parent company, is starting to become more like a holding company over time. And we have this portfolio of different products, different customer segments that we serve. And they're all highly aligned, but increasingly, I think over time, they'll get less coupled. And there's going to be an aspect of decentralization, if you will, to these different product groups or eventually business units. So we're on a path to do that now. We're generating P&Ls for each of our product groups. We have clear leaders of each. We're deferring more of the decision making to them. And I could see that evolving over time, where in 10 years, I mean, who knows? It's kind of become in vogue to change the name of the parent company, like Alphabet or Meta at a certain point, because you actually want to distinguish it from the core retail brand, which helped get you there. So
are you going to become Base? And then point and look, I like that. That wasn't a laughable matter. I was going to charge you for my branding.
Many different names are possible, I suppose. But look, this isn't something that's like near term. I haven't really thought about it that seriously. But in 10 years, who knows? I think the parent company will be more like a holding company, and who knows? We may even change the name at some point, but to reflect that. But that's a long-term vision.
Brian, listen, I can't wait to see the documentary. I'm so excited for that. Thank you so much for joining me today. And as always, I love the chat.
Yeah, thank you. It's on, if people are curious, it's on YouTube, Amazon Prime, Apple TV, Hulu, and would love people to check it out. It's a story about a founder's journey, and so it's perfectly aligned for your audience. We tried to show the good, bad, and the ugly, all the quirky characters, what it takes to actually build something that goes from me on my laptop to being a public company, and parts of it are embarrassing, but parts of it are awesome, and I hope people enjoy it.
You are a hero, my friend. Thank you so much for that.